So how does this happen? How does the guy who literally wrote the book on maximum pressure, a leader whose whole identity is built on economic bullying, suddenly find himself, well, completely unarmed? We're going to dive into this incredible paradox of how Donald Trump, when he went up against Iran, got systematically stripped of all his favorite weapons. He was actually forced to do the exact opposite of everything he stood for. And it all comes down to this one simple observation. This wasn't just about who has the bigger army or the bigger economy. Nope. This was about who controls the tempo, who gets to decide when things happen. And in this trust match, Iran completely seized control of the clock, and they turned the entire global system to their advantage. I mean, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? How did the world's biggest economic superpower just lose its grip? Well, it wasn't an accident. It was the result of a really brilliant and deliberate strategy. So let's break it down, step by step, and see how this incredible power reversal actually went down. All right, here's our game plan. We're going to start by figuring out what exactly Trump's kryptonite was. Then, we'll look at how the sanctions totally backfired, how Iran grabbed the reins of the economic clock, turned America's strength into a weakness, and, finally, why the U.S. was basically dragged to the negotiating table. Okay, first up, Trump's Iranian kryptonite. This is all about the hard limits of economic warfare. You have to remember, the whole Trump doctrine was built on this one idea, that you can bend any country to your will just by threatening their economy. Iran was the country that proved that idea was just wrong. So why did maximum pressure just fall flat? Well, for one, the second things got military, threatening things like tariffs just sounded ridiculous. Plus, all those years of sanctions, they didn't stop Iran's nuclear program, and they sure didn't weaken their power in the region. But the most important part, the U.S. lost control of the timeline. Iran was the one calling the shots now. And the result was a total flip of the script. The entire power dynamic was inverted. Iran didn't just even the odds. They figured out how to make America's huge conventional power almost irrelevant. They created a whole new kind of strategic advantage that played right into their hands. Which leads us right to the sanctions boomerang. See, Iran didn't just push back against the pressure. They grabbed the global economic system and turned it around like a weapon pointed right back at the U.S. They figured out how to master the world's economic clock. And here's where they get all that leverage. By controlling the Strait of Hormuz, they've got their hand on the tap for a fifth of the entire world's oil supply. Then, through their allies, the Houthis, they can mess with the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, disrupting almost a quarter of all global shipping. These aren't just sea lanes, they are the literal arteries of the world economy. And the economic whiplash from this was immediate. It was dramatic. The second Iran flexed its muscles and shut down the Strait of Hormuz, look what happened. The price of oil shot up from $71 to $112 a barrel, practically overnight. An economy like the U.S. is incredibly sensitive to that kind of shock, especially with an election just around the corner. So what's the play? You call your allies for help, right? Well, that's what Trump tried to do. His call for a naval coalition to go in and fix things was a total bust. China, Japan, France, Germany, they all said, no thanks. Suddenly, Washington was standing all alone, facing an enemy that didn't even have to fire a shot to get what it wanted. The threat was enough. And this is where the story gets really wild. This is the great reversal. Let's really dig into how America's greatest strength, its massive economic power, was methodically turned into its biggest weakness. The speed of this collapse is just breathtaking. In just 5 days, the administration went from maximum pressure to basically surrendering. You've got oil prices through the roof, no international friends coming to help, so they were forced to announce a temporary lift of sanctions on Iranian oil, the very sanctions that were the crown jewel of their entire foreign policy. Now, the official spin they tried to put on it was, oh, we're using Iranian barrels against the Iranians to get the market back to normal. But come on, everybody knew what it was. It was a complete capitulation. Trump was literally forced to take apart his own signature policy because he had no other choice. The weapon he used against others had been turned on him. But Iran wasn't finished, oh no. The next move they made was a strategic checkmate. It created this inescapable trap that put the United States in a totally impossible situation, and this was the Red Sea trap. So what Iran did was transform the map into this interconnected system of hostages. It wasn't just about Hormuz anymore. By getting their Houthi allies involved in the Red Sea, they linked the world's oil artery to one of its most vital trade routes. Now, you couldn't fix one problem without making the other one a whole lot worse. And this is the absolute genius of the trap. The U.S. took military action against the Houthis, right? They were trying to restore freedom of navigation. But that very action, the one meant to solve the problem, became the exact justification Iran needed to escalate its threat in the Red Sea. It was a perfect strategic catch-22. So where does all of this lead? Well, with no good military options on the table and an economic crisis blowing up at home, there was really only one path left. The United States was forced to the negotiating table. I mean, really, this was the only way it could end. A full-scale war would have been an economic nightmare. The political pressure from skyrocketing gas prices at home was just too much to handle. The U.S. had no allies willing to join a military fight. And, behind the scenes, you had mediators from Egypt, Qatar, and the UK already working the phones. The public posturing was just for show. The real talks were already happening. Just look at how completely the roles were reversed. It's stunning. In the old days, the U.S. set all the terms, and Iran was the one begging for sanctions relief. Now the U.S. is the one demanding open sea lanes, and Iran is the one in the driver's seat, setting the terms. The old principle of no negotiation was totally replaced by the new reality of forced negotiation. There's actually a term for what we've just seen here. It's a textbook case of strategic inversion. It's that process where a country's greatest strengths, in this case, economic power, sanctions, military might, get twisted around and transformed into its biggest vulnerabilities. And that brings us right back to our original metaphor, because it's perfect. Kryptonite doesn't kill Superman, right? It just makes him powerless. Iran didn't need to beat the United States in some huge war. All it had to do was neutralize America's power, to make its greatest strengths work against it. And you know what? It worked. So we're left with this final, really big question, and it goes way beyond just this one conflict. What does it actually mean for the world when the old tools of power, things like economic sanctions and military threats, can be so easily turned back against the people using them? It might just signal a fundamental change in the nature of power itself.